A marriage of necessity gave the mountain man the one thing he never planned, for the mountains had shaped him long before people ever tried to. Tall, silent, and unforgiving, they were the only companions the man had trusted for years. He lived far from paved roads and crowded towns, in a small cabin built by his own hands. The walls were thick, the roof strong, and everything inside had a purpose. Nothing was there for comfort alone. Life up here did not allow useless things, and it did not allow useless feelings either. People in the nearby valley knew him only by reputation. They called him the Mountain Man. Some said he was difficult. Others said he simply wanted to be left alone. The truth was simpler. He had learned through experience that relying on anyone else usually ended in disappointment. The mountains never promised more than they gave, and that honesty suited him. Each morning, he rose before the sun. He chopped wood, checked traps, and prepared for the long day ahead. Winters were brutal, and even summer could turn dangerous without warning. Survival required planning, discipline, and silence. He spoke little, even when he had to go into town for supplies. A nod, a short word, and then he was gone again, back to the place where he felt in control. The idea of marriage had never crossed his mind as something he wanted. Marriage meant compromise, noise, and emotional demands. None of those had a place in his carefully ordered life. He had built his routine around being alone, and he believed that was how it would always be. Then circumstances changed. It started with a letter delivered by a neighbor who rarely climbed that far up the mountain. The paper was worn, the handwriting unfamiliar. The message inside was brief and serious. A legal issue involving the land, combined with pressure from local authorities, meant his claim to the property could be challenged. The solution offered was strange but legal. A formal marriage would secure certain rights and remove the dispute entirely. He read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it on the table. The fire cracked softly beside him. He felt no panic, only irritation. He had worked this land for years. He had improved it, protected it, and survived on it alone. The thought that a piece of paper and a rule written by people far away could threaten that made his jaw tighten. He considered ignoring it. He had ignored people before, and it had always worked. But this time the problem would not disappear. The valley was changing. More people were moving in, more laws being enforced. His isolation no longer protected him the way it once had. Meanwhile, down in the valley, the woman faced her own problem. She had never imagined her life turning the way it had either. She was practical, hardworking, and proud of standing on her own. But a series of events, loss of work, a family situation she could not escape, and limited options, had placed her in a position where security mattered more than pride. When the proposal reached her, she laughed at first. Marriage to a man she barely knew, living high in the mountains for reasons that had nothing to do with affection. It sounded outdated and unfair, but laughter faded as reality settled in. She reviewed her choices carefully. None of them were good. This one at least offered stability. They met for the first time in a small office in town. The air was stiff with formality. Papers were spread across a wooden desk. The mountain man stood near the window, uncomfortable in clean clothes, hands clasped behind his back. The woman sat straight in her chair, eyes alert, taking everything in. They did not smile. The official explained the arrangement in clear terms. This was a marriage of necessity, nothing more. Each would retain independence. There were rules, boundaries, and expectations. On paper, it was simple. In reality, both understood that sharing a life, even under agreement, was never truly simple. When they finally spoke to each other, their words were cautious. "I live far up the mountain," he said. "The life is hard." "I can work," she replied. "I don't expect easy." He studied her for a moment, not unkindly but carefully. She did not look fragile, though she was clearly out of place in this situation. He respected honesty, and she had not pretended otherwise. They agreed. not with enthusiasm but with acceptance. The ceremony was quiet. No celebration, no guests beyond what was required. A few signatures, a few spoken words, and it was done. Two strangers bound by law and circumstance, not by choice. The ride to the cabin was silent. The path grew rougher as they climbed higher. Trees thickened and the air grew colder. She watched the land change through the window, feeling the distance from her old life stretch further with every mile. When they arrived, he showed her the cabin with short explanations, where water was stored, where food was kept. What rules mattered most. He spoke as one would explain tools, not emotions. She listened carefully, understanding that learning this place was essential. That night they ate in silence. The fire burned low. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a warning. Both lay awake in separate rooms, staring at the ceiling, aware of the presence of another person under the same roof. He told himself this was temporary, a solution to a problem, nothing more. She told herself the same thing. Neither could have known that this decision, made for survival and stability, had already begun to change the shape of their lives in ways they had never planned for. Morning came early in the mountains, long before the sun showed its full face. The man was already awake when the pale light crept through the small cabin windows. He moved quietly out of habit, careful not to make noise, even though he was no longer alone. For years, silence had been his companion, and his body still followed that rule. He stepped outside, breathing in the cold air. Frost covered the ground and the forest stood still, as if waiting. He split wood, stacked it neatly, and checked the area around the cabin. Everything looked the same as it had the day before, yet he felt the difference. There was a new presence inside his home, and it unsettled him more than he expected. Inside, the woman woke later. She lay still for a moment, listening. The quiet was different from the quiet she knew. It was deeper, heavier. There were no distant cars, no voices, no signs of other people, only the wind and the faint sound of movement outside. She sat up slowly, reminding herself where she was and why. She dressed carefully, choosing practical clothes. When she stepped into the main room, she saw the man at the table repairing a worn glove. He looked up briefly and nodded. "There's water by the door," he said. "Breakfast is simple." "Simple is fine," she replied. They ate without much conversation. The food was plain but filling. She noticed how everything had a place, how nothing was wasted. Even crumbs were brushed into a small container. This was a life built on care and caution. After breakfast, he explained the day. He would be checking traps and repairing a section of fence farther up the slope. She could rest or explore nearby, but only where it was safe. "I'd like to help," she said. He paused, clearly considering it. "The work isn't easy." "I know," she answered, "but I can learn." He handed her a pair of gloves and showed her how to stack wood properly. It was simple work but tiring. Her hands ached quickly, yet she did not complain. He watched from a distance, saying little but noticing everything. She was slower than he was, but careful. She listened when corrected and tried again without frustration. As the hours passed, an unspoken rhythm formed. He worked on the fence. She stacked wood and carried supplies. They did not talk much, but they moved around each other with growing awareness. When she stumbled on uneven ground, he reached out without thinking, steadying her arm. Their eyes met briefly, then both looked away. By midday, clouds gathered and the air turned colder. He noticed it first. "We should head back," he said. "Weather can change fast." The walk back was quiet, but the pace was quicker. When they reached the cabin, the first drops of rain were already falling. Soon, it turned into a steady downpour, drumming against the roof. Inside, the space felt smaller with the storm pressing in. She helped prepare a meal, following his instructions. At one point, she reached for a pan at the same time he did. Their hands brushed. It was brief, almost nothing, but both felt it. She pulled back, focusing on the task. He cleared his throat and turned away. The afternoon passed with quiet work. She cleaned, organized, and asked questions about the tools and supplies. He answered simply, without detail, but with honesty. She learned which shelves held important items and which ones were not to be touched unless necessary. As evening came, the storm eased, leaving the forest dripping and dark. They sat by the fire, not facing each other directly. She noticed scars on his hands, marks of years of labor. He noticed how she watched the flames, thoughtful and calm, not fearful of the isolation as he had expected. "Do you miss the valley?" he asked suddenly. She considered the question. "Some things," she said, "but not everything." He nodded, understanding more than her words suggested. That night the wind grew stronger. A loud crack echoed from the trees outside. She woke with a start, heart racing. The unfamiliar sounds made it hard to breathe. She sat up, unsure of what to do. He was at her door moments later, holding a lantern. "Just a tree branch," he said calmly. "It happens." She nodded, embarrassed by her fear. "I'm not used to this." "You will be," he replied, not unkindly. She lay back down, listening as his footsteps moved away. The cabin settled into quiet again. Days passed in a similar pattern. Work, meals, rest. Slowly, routines formed that included both of them. He began leaving small tasks for her without being asked. She began anticipating what needed to be done. They still spoke little, but their silence was no longer tense. One afternoon, she found an old photograph tucked inside a book. It showed him younger, standing beside someone she did not recognize. She did not ask about it. She placed it back carefully, respecting the privacy he had not offered. He noticed later that the book was exactly where he had left it. Something about that stayed with him. By the end of the week, the cabin no longer felt like a temporary shelter to her. It felt like a place she was learning to belong. To him, it no longer felt entirely his alone. Neither said it aloud, but both sensed the shift. They were still strangers, bound by necessity, yet something quiet was growing between them. Not love, not yet, but trust. And in the mountains, trust was the first step toward survival. The change did not happen all at once. It arrived slowly, like the mountain seasons, almost unnoticed at first. Days blended together, marked by work, quiet meals, and long evenings by the fire. What once felt awkward now felt familiar, though neither of them spoke about it. The man had always trusted patterns. He trusted the way snow followed cold, the way the sun rose and set, the way hard work led to survival. People, however, had never followed patterns he could depend on. That was why he had chosen this life. Yet now, every morning when he stepped outside, he knew someone was inside the cabin waiting. The thought unsettled him, but it also brought a strange sense of steadiness. The woman noticed the change too. At first she had counted days, telling herself this was temporary, but slowly she stopped counting. She learned how to read the sky, how to listen to the forest, how to tell when the weather would turn. She learned which of his silences meant focus and which meant thought. She learned not to fill every quiet moment with words. One afternoon, while he was repairing a section of the roof, the wind picked up unexpectedly. Dark clouds rolled over the mountain faster than expected. She was below sorting supplies when she heard a sharp sound and then a sudden stillness. She looked up and saw him gripping the ladder, his face tight with pain. "What happened?" she called out. "Lost my footing," he said shortly. "Twisted my leg." Her heart jumped. Without thinking, she moved quickly, steadying the ladder while he carefully climbed down. His movements were controlled, but she could see the strain in his face. Inside the cabin, she helped him sit near the fire. He tried to wave her off, insisting it was nothing serious, but she knelt and checked his leg carefully, just as she had seen done before. "It's swollen," she said. "You need to rest." "I don't rest," he replied. "You do today," she said firmly, surprising both of them. He looked at her, then away. Finally, he nodded once. For the next few days, she took over many of the tasks. She carried water, prepared meals, and checked the area near the cabin. The work was exhausting, but she did not complain. He watched from his chair, frustrated by his own stillness yet quietly grateful. "You didn't sign up for this," he said one evening. She stirred the pot slowly. "I signed up for what was needed." Her words stayed with him long after the fire burned low. During his forced rest, something else changed. With less physical work to distract him, memories surfaced. Things he had buried deep. Loss, disappointment, choices he had made to protect himself. One night, as the wind moved softly through the trees, he spoke without planning to. "I wasn't always alone," he said. She looked at him, careful not to interrupt. "I trusted someone once," he continued. "It didn't end well," she nodded. "That can make silence feel safer." He met her eyes then, surprised by her understanding. He had expected questions. He had expected pity. He received neither. When his leg healed enough for light work, they walked together along a familiar trail. The forest was calm, sunlight filtering through the trees. At one point, she slipped on loose ground. He reached out instinctively, steadying her. This time, neither pulled away immediately. "Thank you," she said quietly. He released her hand slowly. "You're learning fast." As winter approached, preparations became more urgent. They worked side by side, storing food, reinforcing the cabin, planning carefully. Trust grew in small ways. He began asking her opinion. She began offering ideas without hesitation. One evening, as snow fell gently outside, she spoke about her past. About the life she had left behind, the expectations placed on her, the strength it had taken to choose a different path. "I didn't plan to end up here," she admitted. "Neither did I," he replied. They shared a quiet smile, brief but real. Then came the storm. It arrived suddenly, fiercer than expected. Wind howled around the cabin, shaking the walls. Snow fell thick and heavy, cutting off visibility. He checked the doors and windows, his movements careful but determined. They stayed awake through the night, taking turns feeding the fire. At one point, a loud crash echoed from outside. A tree had fallen nearby, blocking part of the path. "We'll deal with it when the storm passes," he said calmly. She nodded, trusting his judgment. When morning came, the world was white and silent. The storm had passed, leaving behind damage and isolation. He stepped outside to assess the situation and did not return as quickly as expected. She waited, worry growing. Finally, she pulled on her coat and followed. She found him near the fallen tree, breathing hard. "I'm fine," he said before she could speak. "Just misjudged the weight." She stepped closer, concern clear on her face. "You don't have to do everything alone." He looked at her then, really looked. The words hit something deep inside him. "I don't know how to do it any other way," he admitted. "Maybe you don't have to know," she said softly. "Maybe you just start." Together, they cleared what they could and marked what would need more work later. The task took longer, but it was safer. That evening, as they sat by the fire, he realized something had shifted, not just in their routines, but inside him. The walls he had built were not gone, but there were cracks now. Light slipped through. He had entered this marriage to protect land and avoid trouble. He had planned for survival, nothing more. But as he watched her move around the cabin, confident and calm, he understood the truth. This arrangement had given him something he had never planned for, not comfort, not convenience, but connection. And for the first time in years, the thought did not scare him. Winter settled fully over the mountain, covering everything in thick white layers. The forest grew quiet, and the world seemed smaller, held tightly by cold and snow. Inside the cabin, life slowed, but it did not stop. Every day still required effort, planning, and patience. The difference now was that the work was shared. The man moved more carefully than before. His leg had healed, but the memory of weakness stayed with him. He no longer rushed tasks that could wait. The woman noticed and adjusted without comment. She learned to read his movements just as he had learned to read the weather. They spoke more now, though still simply. Words were used when needed, not wasted. Mornings began with small routines. She prepared breakfast while he checked supplies. Sometimes he brought in snow to melt for water. Sometimes she brushed snow from the steps before he could do it himself. These small acts slowly changed the shape of their days. What once felt like obligation now felt like habit, and habit over time began to feel like choice. One afternoon, as they sorted stored food, she asked a question she had held back for weeks. "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" she asked gently. He paused, holding a jar in his hands. "I used to think this place was all I needed." "And now?" she asked. He set the jar down carefully. "Now I think about it more than I expected." The honesty surprised him as much as it surprised her. Outside the mountain, life did not pause. News traveled slowly, but it did arrive. A man from the valley came one day, struggling through the snow to deliver a message. He brought updates about the land, about town decisions, about people who were still watching. "They know about the marriage," the man said. "Some think it's strange." The mountain man shrugged. "It's legal." "Yes," the visitor replied, "but not everyone believes it will last." After the man left, silence returned. The woman sat by the fire, staring into the flames. "Does it bother you?" she asked. "What people think?" He considered the question. "I stopped caring about people's opinions a long time ago." She nodded, but her expression showed worry. That night she could not sleep. Her thoughts turned over and over. She had entered this marriage for stability, for safety. But now her feelings were no longer simple. She had grown used to this life, to this man, to the quiet understanding between them. The idea that it might all end suddenly unsettled her. In the days that followed, tension crept in quietly. Not anger, but uncertainty. She became more thoughtful, more distant. He noticed, though he did not understand the cause. Finally, one evening, as snow fell softly outside, he spoke. "You've been quiet," he said. She hesitated, then answered honestly. "I don't know where I belong anymore." He looked at her, surprised. "You belong here, at least for now." "For now," she repeated. "But what about later?" The question hung between them. "I didn't plan that far ahead," he admitted. "I never do." She stood and walked toward the window, watching the snow drift down. "I need to know if I'm building something real or just passing time." He felt the weight of her words. This marriage had started as a solution. He had believed emotions would stay out of it, but the truth was clear now. Something real had formed, even if neither had named it. "I don't want you to feel trapped," he said quietly. She turned to face him. "I don't feel trapped. I feel unsure. There's a difference." Before he could respond, a loud sound came from outside. The wind had picked up again, stronger than before. Snow blew hard against the cabin walls. He moved quickly, checking the doors and securing the shutters. She followed his lead, helping without hesitation. The storm grew worse through the night, shaking the cabin and testing their preparations. At one point, the fire burned low faster than expected. He went outside to bring in more wood, despite the harsh wind. She watched from the door, worry tightening her chest. When he returned, covered in snow and breathing hard, she stepped forward without thinking and brushed the snow from his shoulders. "Don't scare me like that," she said softly. He froze for a moment, then met her eyes. In that instant, he understood something important. This was no longer just about survival. Someone cared whether he came back inside. The storm passed by morning, leaving behind deep drifts and fallen branches. Clearing the path took hours. They worked together, exhausted but determined. At one point, he slipped on the ice. She grabbed his arm, steadying him. "I've got you," she said. The words stayed with him. Later that day, as they rested, he spoke again, more openly than ever before. "I don't know how to promise things," he said. "I've lived too long planning only for myself." She listened closely. "But I know this," he continued. "I don't want this to end just because it started out of necessity." Her breath caught slightly. "Neither do I." That admission changed something between them. The air felt lighter, though nothing else had changed. They still had work to do. The mountain was still unforgiving. The future was still uncertain. But the question of whether they were facing it together no longer felt unanswered. Days passed and the tension eased. They laughed more quietly over small things, a burned meal, a shared mistake. The laughter surprised them both. One evening he brought out an old box from beneath the bed. Inside were a few personal items, things he had kept hidden away. "I don't show this to anyone," he said. She understood the meaning behind the gesture. It was trust, offered without condition. As winter deepened, the cabin grew warmer with shared presence. The marriage that had once been only a legal solution now felt like something chosen, even if the words had not yet been spoken aloud. He had spent years believing strength meant standing alone. Now, he was learning a different kind of strength, one that came from allowing someone else to stay. And she, who had come seeking stability, had found something deeper, not certainty, but partnership. The mountain still stood tall and silent outside, but inside the cabin, a life was quietly being rewritten. Spring arrived slowly, almost carefully, as if the mountain itself was unsure whether it was safe to change. Snow softened, then pulled back inch by inch. Streams began to run again, and the forest breathed with quiet life. Inside the cabin, the shift was felt just as clearly. The man noticed it first in the mornings. Light entered the cabin earlier, warmer and brighter. The woman hummed softly as she prepared breakfast, a habit she had not realized she had formed. The silence that once felt heavy now felt calm, even comforting. They worked outside more as the days grew longer. Together they cleared fallen branches, repaired damaged fencing, and checked the land after the long winter. The mountain tested them less now, but the work was still demanding. They moved easily together, understanding each other without many words. One afternoon, as they rested near the edge of the forest, the woman looked out across the land and spoke quietly. "I used to think stability meant knowing exactly what would happen next," she said. "Now I think it means knowing who will be there when things change." He nodded slowly. "I used to think needing no one was strength," she glanced at him. And now I know that choosing someone is stronger," he replied. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of truth. As the snow fully disappeared, visitors returned to the valley roads. With them came questions and expectations. A man from town arrived one day with paperwork confirming that all legal matters were settled. The land was secure. The marriage had done exactly what it was meant to do. When the man left, the woman held the paper in her hands, staring at it. "So that's it," she said. "The reason this started." He watched her carefully. "Yes. And now?" she asked. He took a long breath. For years, he had avoided plans beyond survival. He had avoided words that created expectations. But he knew avoiding this moment would cost him something far greater than discomfort. "Now we decide what it means," he said. They did not rush the conversation. That evening, they sat by the fire, talking openly for the first time about the future. Not in grand promises, but in honest thoughts. He spoke of the life he had chosen to protect himself. She spoke of the life she had left behind to protect her independence. Neither wanted to go back to who they had been before. In the days that followed, they made small changes. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. A second chair was placed closer to the fire. Shelves were rearranged to hold things that mattered to both of them. The cabin slowly reflected two lives instead of one. One morning, she did not wake up to silence. She woke to the sound of him working in the kitchen, trying to prepare breakfast on his own. The result was imperfect, but the effort mattered more than the result. She smiled without thinking. Later that week, they walked down to the valley together. This time, they did not walk separately or keep distance between them. People noticed. Some whispered, some smiled. A few nodded with respect. The mountain man felt something unfamiliar as they passed through town. Not discomfort, not anger, but ease. For the first time, he did not feel like he was passing through a place where he did not belong. On the walk back up the mountain, she stopped near a familiar bend in the trail. "This was where I realized I wasn't afraid anymore," she said. "Of the mountain?" he asked. "Of staying," she replied. He reached for her hand without hesitation. She took it just as naturally. As spring turned toward early summer, the land flourished. They planted together, planned together, and rested together. The rhythm of their days felt settled, not forced. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, he spoke the words he had once believed he would never say. "I don't want this to be temporary," he said. She looked at him, her expression soft but steady. "Neither do I." There was no dramatic moment, no grand declaration. Just truth, spoken clearly. The marriage that had begun as necessity had grown into choice. The mountain man who had planned only for solitude had found partnership. The woman who had sought safety had found belonging. They stood together outside the cabin, watching the sky darken. The mountain rose around them, unchanged and eternal. But within its quiet strength, two lives had changed forever. He had planned for survival. He had prepared for isolation. What he never planned for was love, and yet it had found him anyway.